I have seen the longest of winters. I have seen compassion conquer despair. I have seen that hope is a flame that can't be extinguished. Is this wisdom, or is it the ad copy for AccuView contact lenses? Follow no one, because the only path to our purpose is the one never taken before. We determine our fate. It has to come from within. Yet this course demands sacrifice, forsaking the certainty of the familiar to risk confrontation with the inevitable. Is this wisdom, or is it the ad copy for a Lexus SUV? Sometimes you've got to go back to actually move forward. I don't mean going back to reminisce or chase ghosts, but go back to see where you came from, where you've been, how you got here, see where you're going. I know there are those that say you can't go back. Yes, you can. You just have to look in the right place. Is this wisdom? Or is it Matthew McConaughey waxing existentially in an ad for a Lincoln MKZ? It's that one. To hear 100 modern parables and proverbs, all we need to do is to turn on our televisions or our social media. Proverbs are everywhere today in pithy statements, tiny poems, ad copy, and sayings. But unlike the ones that we find in Scripture, these modern proverbs do not provide us instruction on how to live a wise and righteous life. More often, they provide instruction on what we should buy, where we should spend our money, what we should consume. In our society, which is dominated by conspicuous consumption, all our proverbs have become advertisements and marketing copy, pumped into our ears daily by large corporations for quarterly profits. We may believe they have no effect on the way that we think or feel, but we're not immune to the vision that they cast for us if we are honest. Make no mistake, like the biblical Proverbs, these modern-day versions invite us into a particular form of life and a way of being in the world, one that is determined by having the nicest things, the latest gadgets, the coolest stuff, the best belongings, the perfect possessions. In fact, these modern proverbial ads call us into a life where we can easily become, if we are not careful, possessed by our possessions, the ones we have and the ones we don't have yet. Where are we supposed to turn for true wisdom amidst a cacophony of cheap proverbs? Where does wisdom reside? Where can true wisdom be found in this day and age? On the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican. There, the great Italian artist Michelangelo painted one of the finest examples of high Renaissance art, depicting 9 scenes from the book of Genesis, including the famous creation of Adam. And even if you've never been to Rome or the Vatican, you've most likely seen this image in a book or a movie. God is on one side of the fresco, surrounded by angels, and Adam is lying in repose on the other, and the spark of life is passing from God's right arm to Adam's left. It's become the most iconic depiction of the creation story in Western history. But what I'd never noticed is what God's left hand is doing. God's left arm is wrapped around the shoulders of a young woman who is strong and eager, eyes open and alert, staring intently at Adam, with her knee bent, poised for action. Scholars agree she is the most realistic portrait of a woman Michelangelo ever painted, and her name is Wisdom. Why does Michelangelo's God have an arm wrapped around wisdom? It's because in the book of Proverbs, wisdom is personified as a woman, a divine feminine character who was present with God before the foundation of the earth and who partnered with God as a master worker in creation, creating the world and birthing humanity. Throughout the pages of this stuffy, ancient collection of poetic instructions on how to live in relationship with God and others, Lady Wisdom appears and cries out from the streets, calling to humanity, offering counsel for our edification, singing her song of truth and virtue, telling us the story of righteousness and justice. She recommends that we learn prudence and acquire intelligence along the way, and warns us against wickedness and evil and arrogance and deceit and perverted speech. Mark Robinson, it seems, did not hear the message of Lady Wisdom, but I digress. Lady Wisdom proclaims, "I love those who love me, and those who will seek me diligently and will find me." Wisdom loves those who love wisdom, who search for it, who strive for it. Her presence and partnership with God in the creation of the world has led many theologians to point out the obvious parallels between the story of Lady Wisdom and the incarnation of the Logos, or the Word, that we find in the prologue to the Gospel of John, where it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And the Word was God. All things came into being through the Word, and without the Word, not one thing came into being. And the Word became flesh and lived among us." In his poetic introduction to the gospel, John was clearly being influenced by the primordial power of Lady Wisdom's story, and thereby permanently connected this ancient tradition of the divine feminine with the life and death of a new wisdom teacher who has just been born, Jesus of Nazareth, of whom we sing each Advent, "O come thou wisdom from on high, who orders all things mightily. To us the path of knowledge show, and teach us in her ways to go." Rejoice. If God created the world and all its inhabitants with an arm around Lady Wisdom, then all the patriarchal theologies that have dominated the church and oppressed women throughout Christian history are nothing more than foolish nonsense. Lady Wisdom's primeval attendance and activity in the formation of the earth proves that femininity was never meant to be a scandal to God or the church, but a pathway to divine wisdom. As the California poet James McMichael wrote, "Whose order was it that made the ends of the earth? Who put clothes on the deep? What is his name, and what is his son's name? If you can tell, wisdom can. Still a child, she attended God when God had not yet divided the waters. Wisdom was God's delight. She was with him over the waters. God and wisdom were two, just as day and night were also two. Wisdom confides that God's all around us, inside all that God holds. Wisdom is at the work of meaning for the faithful, that there is good to be had in this world if God is heeded." Lady Wisdom and God co-creating the world together is a beautiful image, but of course we're wondering, what does that have to do with us, here on the ground with our feet in the soil? For starters, Proverbs teaches us that wisdom is written into the fabric of creation itself. Therefore, creation is its own kind of wisdom. From the foundation of the universe, the earth was imbued with divine wisdom, which is a way of saying the earth itself is wise. Creation lives and breathes with the unforced rhythms of divine wisdom. It moves in cycles of eat and sleep and work and rest and bloom and fade and birth and rebirth, harvest and fallow seasons. Sabbath is the law of the land. Death and resurrection are built into its framework. Nothing in creation imagines that it exists as self-sufficient or independent. Instead, everything relies on and participates in a complex network of interdependence, communication, cooperation. The principles by which creation is governed and operates are the oldest and the deepest form of wisdom. There is, of course, only one species on earth who consistently fails to attend to the unforced rhythms of divine wisdom. And that is us, human beings. We have knowledge, vast amounts of knowledge at our fingertips, an infinite source of information today at the push of a button, more knowledge than we can process. But Proverbs and its leading lady testify that there is a profound difference between knowledge and wisdom. Augustine was one of the first to parse out this difference in his Confessions, where he distinguished scientia, or abstract knowledge, from sapientia, or wisdom. Both are forms of information about the world, but according to Augustine, the key difference is that abstract knowledge, like science today, can be perverted toward evil ends, as we've seen in the advent of technologies like the atomic bomb and other weapons, the internet, social media, smartphones, and artificial intelligence, where wisdom, for Augustine, is never about power, but always goodness. Wisdom, he wrote, is that which no evil use can ever be made of it. It's an amazing definition. Today we have more knowledge than we've ever had before in the history of the world, and yet we have very little wisdom. We have the knowledge to build skyscrapers and aircraft carriers, airplanes and spaceships that can go to the moon, but we can't build a solution to hunger, poverty, or the housing crisis. We have the knowledge to create computers and the internet, social media, and smartphones, but we can't create a solution for loneliness, alienation, or social isolation. We have the knowledge to cure polio or tuberculosis, malaria, cholera, and other diseases, but we can't cure the diseases of racism, classism, sexism, ableism, xenophobia, or homophobia. One of the most maddening paradoxes of modern life is that we have all the knowledge in the world, and yet we are no wiser for it. We are living in an age with an overabundance of knowledge and an extreme scarcity of wisdom. One of the finest insults that I've ever received in my life is, "Ben, wisdom has been chasing you, but you've always been a little faster." It could be said of all of us at some point in our lives. But now it could be said today of our nation and our world. No other generation has been so successful at using technological knowledge to manipulate the world, to satisfy our own appetites. And now, more than any previous generation, we are witnessing the effects of this perverted knowledge that is not connected to goodness. We have greatly increased our technical ability, but our wisdom has not grown in due measure. And now we're seeing the impact of this knowledge that is devoid of wisdom manifested for us on a global scale. Our current ecological catastrophe can be seen precisely as a crisis of knowledge without wisdom. Knowledge run amok. In this century, powerful technological knowledge has proliferated the world, and yet it has not been sufficiently tempered or disciplined by a humble and discerning understanding of how God and Lady Wisdom have ordered the world. And our future looks bleak if we can't find the gumption to change course soon. Scholar E.F. Schumacher once said, "We are now far too clever to be able to survive without wisdom." We are far too clever to be able to survive without wisdom. Proverbs teaches us that if technology is to be helpful and not destructive, we must learn to contemplate the world and ask, what's God's intention for it, humbly accepting how that limits us in our manipulation of creation. Wisdom is found in observing the creation and learning how to live in ways that do not violate but contribute to the well-being of the whole created order, not just our small corner of existence. To become wise human beings, we must learn how to move beyond abstract knowledge, to accept our place in the order of things, and to live in concert with the unforced rhythms of divine wisdom. This is, of course, easier said than done, which is why there are so many books of wisdom literature in the Bible trying to help us to figure out how to embody these lessons in our everyday lives. But where are we supposed to begin? We can start by following the lead of Lady Wisdom, who proclaimed, "When God marked out the foundations of the earth, I was beside God like a master worker, and I was daily God's delight, playing before God always, playing in God's inhabited world and delighting in the human race." There's an extraordinary revelation here in this verse. The creator of the world and of humanity is a God who not only works and rests, but who plays. A God who plays, who is playing with Lady Wisdom, and the universe and humanity is their playground. They play together, it seems, not for some great moral purpose or lesson to teach us, but for its own sake, for the sake of pleasure and enjoyment, taking great delight in the inhabited world and in human beings. It turns out that just like the grief that we talked about last week, play is also its own form of wisdom, a divine attribute, an essential aspect of our existence as creatures who were made in the image of a playful God. The God who plays is an arresting surprise for those of us who were raised as sinners in the hands of an angry God by fundamentalist communities who took themselves far too seriously, where the definition of religion was no fun at all, and having a good time was considered an affront against God. For the Puritans and others like them, God was all work and no play. But unbeknownst to them, their rejection of divine playfulness was a form of blasphemy. One of my teachers, Roger Owens, once said that when it comes to spirituality, the rule is this: if it's human, it belongs. And play is most certainly human. In fact, play is that innate capacity given to us by God that flows from who we are as beings created in God's image. Play is one of the quintessential activities of human existence that has been celebrated in virtually all cultures throughout history. We know play is essential to the human development and flourishing of our children, but not only for children. For people of all ages, studies show us, and that a life without play is not only dull and boring, but a lesser and fragmentary form of existence that misses out on the abundance of God. As one writer said, what the toddler or the ball player does is not so very different than what the artist, especially the dancer or the philosopher, does. Singing, dancing, rhyming, scribbling on paper, building towers with blocks. In the case of the child, these are rudimentary, but they are also the basic skills that can develop into the highest form of human art. What is especially remarkable when one begins looking at play is that you discover that its material and social residue is everywhere in what we commonly call culture. Play and culture go hand in hand. In fact, one derives from the other. And without play, there would be very little in the way of culture in our society. We'd be deprived of so much joy and so much delight. To play is to create a life for oneself and to develop a culture for everyone that is not dominated by the never-ending tedium of work and labor. Sadly, in our world today, many of our neighbors do not have any time for play. Leisure is on the decline in American society, as our economic model prioritizes productivity and profit over every other good and extracts our labor in ever-demanding ways to achieve these ends. Evenings have evaporated. Weekends have disappeared as work continues to reign supreme. The forces that make play possible bear down on the heaviest and on the poorest and most marginalized and most vulnerable people. For them, play is often impossible. And the privileged positions of social class and race and gender permit only certain groups to enjoy the right to play and reject that fundamental right as a necessity for all human beings. But everyone deserves the proper time for play. And those of us who have the time should never squander a right that so many of our neighbors do not have, and should also commit ourselves to fight for the right to play for all God's people. We constantly hear about the decline in American religion, the need for radical renewal in the church. Have we yet considered the fact that nobody wants to be a part of an organization where people look like they aren't having any fun? What if we learned how to play together? Just like prayer and preaching, play is a form of worship that connects us with the God who plays. What if we learned how to lean into leisure, not only as a form of fellowship with each other, but as a program we offer as a gift to the community? What if we became witnesses of what it looks like to enjoy being with each other, to delight in our neighbor's presence, to be playful, to be fun, to create time and space for play for ourselves and for the world? As a leading lady in Proverbs teaches us, delighting in each other and creation through play is one of the truest and most profound ways to wisdom. So for God's sake, let us play. For wisdom's sake, let us play. For creation's sake, let us play. For the church's sake, let us learn how to play again. For our children's sake, let us play. For the workers' sake, let us play. For each other's sake, let us play. For the sake of the poor, let us play. For our own life's sake and our own health, let us play. For the sake of the world that we love, let us play. Because to work is to be human, but to play is to be wise. And Lady Wisdom is still strong and eager. Her eyes are open and alert, staring intently at us now as she always has been from the beginning. Her knee is bent and she is poised for action. She is ready to delight in the earth and all of its inhabitants. Wisdom is ready and willing to play with us. So my friends, what are we waiting for? Amen.